Interview with Wilfred F. Stratz, 4907 Applewood Drive, Lansing, Michigan, 48917, phone 517-321-0778, on Tuesday, August the 21st, 1990, with Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center, 4000 North Grand River, Lansing, Michigan. We're in business, Bill.
Well, I started at Oldsmobile on October 21st, 1935. Started in the traffic department. I was hired in as a stenographer and a clerk, helping Mr. Whitmore. D.C. Whitmore was the traffic manager. Donald C. Whitmore. His secretary's name was Martha Lloyd, and she was that period she was getting too much work to do. She was getting overloaded, so I was really helping her out. She took dictation, I took some, and decided doing typing and clerical work.
Was this forms or letters?
Letters, yeah, miscellaneous typing, but actually I took, I took letters from Mr. Whitmore and some of the others that needed it.
Forms, so those pre-carbonized forms?
No, they didn't. I didn't insert the carbon. These were both for letters and for claim forms that had to be typed up. Oh, you had to put the carbon in.
So that would actually be your copy.
Right.
You mentioned claim forms.
That's claims on where a dealer received an automobile that became damaged during transit, either by the trucking company or the railroad. And the dealer would repair the car and then send his paperwork into us, showing how his amount of repairs. Then we gave him his credit right away. Then we took then we had to transfer the information to a special form, which was sent into the railroad or trucking company to get that money back.
Remember any big claims or any bad?
No, not anything special. There was always some of them were, most of them was minor damage. They scratch a bumper or dent a fender. The major ones would be in the case of a wreck, a train wreck, or a trucking company getting into a problem. But there were, some were big enough. Well, in the case of the railroad, they would have a derailment, and cars would be damaged. The trucks would have accident, roll over, or whatever. It was all kinds of accidents.
Accident vehicles must have been.
Sometimes they were beyond repair, and then they would, we would let the carrier buy the car, and then they could do what they wanted to with it. Later on, sometimes if it wasn't too bad, they'd try to get somebody to fix it, and they'd sell it, and that became a very bad thing. In fact, the corporation got into that because they didn't want a trucking company or a railroad people fixing a car and then selling it to the public and to still be under our warranty. And maybe they wouldn't do it right. There was a safety factor too. They couldn't allow. Later on, we would take over the car, the factory would take it over. And in most cases, they would just, they wouldn't try to salvage it because it would be too much labor involved in trying to get the parts off the car.
Just scrap
So
it
they would
out.
just put it in the baler and scrap them out. Yes, yes, they did. They did quite a bit of that to schools, colleges for their automotive classes. That was done quite a bit. No, no, they would have to. They'd have to agree to that. They could not be driven just for educational purposes.
First 1940. Who are some?
Which was that was 5 years after I started. So but most of these people were Mr. E.C. Whitmore was traffic manager. Uh, Lloyd Green was the supervisor of the rail traffic. A.S. Corwin, who later became traffic manager, was head of the trucking operations. Harry Fife was the charge of the rate department. George Scan was a claim clerk, and I worked, this time I was working under him. Cecil Straub, the rate clerk. Earl Cunningham was the superintendent of the warehousing, loading, and shipping, which was a big operation. Involving at that time, most all the cars we shipped were shipped by rail. And he had, probably more than 100 men under him where they loaded the cars day and night. They had a night shift, day shift, and a night shift.
How many cars were you shipping out a day then?
Mm. Well, production in those days was, that was, well, production, I think the sales were maybe around 100,000, 120,000 for the year, all built in Lansing. No assembly plants at that year. And so on a daily basis, I don't know, maybe 400 or 500. They built. I'm not sure about just what those figures are, but
Were they running two shifts?
but they really, yes, only 2 shifts. The total figures that I can remember are 1937 sales reached 200,000 cars, and that was an all-time record. I suppose 35, maybe 100,000, 150. 37 was a big year. And then 1938 was a depression year, and the sales dropped right in half. So I recall they only sold 100,000 cars, right in half. And then 1939, the war started breaking out in Europe, and production started going up as long as they could build cars. I don't remember just when they stopped. I guess probably 1940. Because this chart I had here was issued in 1940, and it reflects the kind of the breaking up of our automotive operations. Several people. I was transferred out into a plant where they made 20mm guns, working for Maynard Murray. Remember him? He was putting John Alphys. Maynard Murray, who had been in sales and display. He was head of the display department. He was made the head of the gun plant, 20mm gun plant, because he'd had some technical experience. John Alphys, who was in the engineering department, he was brought in as a head of one of the gun plants. They had a 20mm and a 37mm plants or guns that they made. So this chart shows where they started transferring people out of our department. Traffic department continued to function, but on a much smaller scale because we weren't shipping cars. But they were still involved in getting all the materials in to build the guns and shipping the guns. And and any of the defense things that we made.
But of course, your traffic department also in charge of getting this equipment in for to build the guns and cannons. Did this?
Yes, anything that, machinery and everything that was shipped, anything that moved in or out, traffic was involved in it.
Did you use the service though?
Not much then. There was very little air in those days. Very, very little. Rail or truck.
Sure.
Air was didn't come into the picture till later.
Well, then, anybody else on this chart here that we should be talking about?
Well, it lists those were the main. Jim Stanaway he started in about the same year I did, 35. He was in the rate department. And here's a man by the name of Nicholas Pilger was head of the retail. Well, it'll be like something like product delivery is now, where customers came in and customers, he took care of them. And then there's a warehouse and shipping. See, they had two shifts. The day shift. Shift number 1 was Alfred Lee. Lawrence Miller was at shift 2. Bill Lane was warehouse office. Lauren Corwin, that's A.S. Corwin's brother, in there too. And then James Hopkins was head of the export boxing department. Any cars that were shipped by export were boxed.
Were those cars or were they not?
Well, they were knocked down. I think the whole car was complete in the box, but it was
But you had to assemble
had
it.
to be assembled.
Right. I see.
And that was quite an operation too, because they did. Let me see, they had 13, there's 16, 17, 30, about 35 men in that department.
This export boxing department. Yes.
Then B. Barrett Armour and Mo Jury. Remember Mo Jury? Anyway, they each had 15 men under them, and they were in charge of the parkers. As the cars came off the assembly line, they had to be parked in the warehouse. They had to park them all, and then after they had
to drive them.
They drove off the line and into and put in a certain place in the warehouse, so they'd know when the orders came through to ship those cars. They'd have to know where they were. Well, it's I think it was building 32. Out in the area where the Logan Street Bridge is now. And those buildings, I think, are still there, but they're used in assembly now.
We have old Martha Lloyd. She had Edna Mallet, who worked on export and claims.
She did the paperwork on the export and also on claims. Export and claims, and I later worked on the claims also.
Too.
But a lot of typing, a lot of typing forms. And it took a lot longer in those days because, like you say, there was no pre-carbon forms or anything.
Your responsibility changed.
Well, when the war was over, then they started bringing people back. Oh. Well, I did clerical work for the manager of the gun plant. Pretty much the same. Well, Maynard Murray, and then he was, as I recall, he was sent to Kansas City, and then John Elphus took over as head of it.
Okay.
Right. Well, it would have been, in the early 40s there. Because according to this, these transfers were made in November 1 of 40.
Your first job in traffic, you were in the Building 60 Administration Building?
Yes.
That located in Building 60 Traffic Department.
We were on the second floor in the south wing of the building.
Okay. For me, where in the plant was that office?
Probably building 40, I think.
Okay. Second floor.
Second floor, yes.
So during the war then, you just continued to expedite machinery and get or ship out?
Yeah, the department. When I went out in the gun plant, I was not doing I was not in the traffic department, out of the department. Because I was strictly a gun operation outfit.
So
and the people are left. Well, I worked for I was the clerk under the Elpis and Maynard Murray. Clerical work and record keeping and typing.
Do you remember what else was
No, I don't. I think they were mostly new people. Wasn't anybody else from traffic in there. I used to remember once a week they had what they called a production meeting which was run by, at that time, John Dykstra was the plant manager. And we'd all go over to Building 60 in a conference room there, and they'd,
which floor was
on the first floor in the south end of the building, and they'd have this meeting every week, and it would last, yeah, I think so, last couple hours. This is where all the superintendents would come in, and they'd go over everything, and I had the job of taking minutes at that meeting, which got kind of hairy sometimes, but we used to have to write up a report on each one of those meetings.
Transcribe it.
Mm-hmm. And then they'll send out copies to everybody. That was interesting. Really. Oh, probably 12 dozen people.
Some department heads attend.
Well, the head of the safety department was. I know John Dykstra ran the meeting, and he'd be the chief and, John Elvis, Maynard Murray, the different superintendents of the departments that I don't remember right now, but it's all the top people, top production people trying to, and also the government had a ordnance inspector, they call him, working right out there in the plant with us, keeping track of seeing that the guns were made to the right specifications and all that. They were kind of hard to get along with sometimes because they were quite strict. But they would sit in on this meeting too, and they had to go over all the problems, machining problems they'd run into, trying to make the gun right. And they were always involved. But that's about, I don't remember all the names right now. John, and the head of the safety department, he was always involved in it because safety operations.
Do you remember any special problems that were discussed or solved?
No, I don't know. And mostly it was problems on getting the material built right, guns. They always had problems. Well, machining problems. The gun barrels and the gun they were what they call tolerances were much tighter than they were on some of the parts that we used to build. The automobile parts that they were, they tried to build them right too, but these had to be exactly right so the gun would function properly. And they had this government man looking over their shoulder all the time, checking on them, and sometimes they'd say that our manufacturing people would would say that they just couldn't do it that good. They just couldn't make it that good. And then the government man would have to give a little bit. Maybe he would loosen up a little bit on the tolerances. Problems like that. And then afterwards, after the war was over, after the war was over, I came back in traffic though, so I didn't do that job anymore.
About 1945.
I think so.
Back in traffic.
I think so. As soon as
Okay.
Right. Well, at that time, Mr. Whitmore had passed away. The corporation sent another man in here, and I don't recall his name now, and he was here only a few months. And he left the corporation, and then that's when Babe Corwin was made traffic manager. I don't know. I don't know. No, I think she had retired or passed away, I think, at that time.
The Babe Road secretary. Was that Addie Matheson?
No. Addie was in car distribution department. No, she was doing pretty much. Really, Maurer came in a little bit later. But Aurelia was his secretary when he passed away. When Corwin passed away, yeah. And we were in the Building 70 then. At that time we were in there, and that's where that's where I remember her being there. And I don't remember what year we went in there.
66. Bill, then, so now you're back in Building 60 after the war. What was your job then?
For a while, I was what they call expediting, working on materials coming into the plant. You know, the purchasing people would talk to a vendor and get these parts coming in here, and then purchasing would come to us and give us the information, and we had to see that it got in here. We had to contact the trucking company, be sure it didn't get bogged down someplace. I did that for a couple of years. Well, yeah, you do. You know, you gotta sometimes charter an airplane to go get some parts. Somebody jump in a car and run down to Detroit and bring some parts back in the car. That was going on all the time. Because no, we'd have like that. Yeah, that would be up. That'd be up the factory. But
purchasing. Or
well, we worked with almost all of them. Steel buyers, name, Struble and Harold Rowan and somebody else. Abe Goosen was the purchasing agent at that time.
So Clayton Denier?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. Clayton Denier was a steel buyer. Now, we were involved with all of them. You know, they had to get the parts in here. If you'd ever allowed the assembly line to shut down because of lack of parts, that's a no-no. Can't do that. Take your head off for that.
Interesting a time you just about made it, almost didn't.
Yeah, there was a lot of cases like that. To show you how this thing worked, one time there was a truck coming in from, I think it was Saginaw steering gear, and it didn't get here, which was a terrible catastrophe. It just didn't show up, and it turned out later that the truck driver had passed away. And that's why he didn't get in here on en route. Yeah, and but boy, that was no excuse when our people drilling, not especially our people, but Bud Randall was head of all. Well, he was over our department at that time. Very critical of that. That was no excuse.
Production.
I think he was production manager. About that time, Floyd Burr was in there too, production manager at one time. But
This man was driving.
yeah, I think he had a heart attack or something. Didn't make it, but that was no excuse. Otherwise, we were as much as told to get rid of that trucking company and get someone else. They couldn't do better than that. That's something.
For heaven's sakes.
It's a tough business. Some people get unreasonable at times, but for the most part, our people understood what we were doing. Yes, he was. Yeah, it was different, all right. And then another case, one of the dispatchers for the trucking company that we were working with, we found out later he wasn't always honest with us. You know, he'd tell us it's going to be in, it's on the way, and everything, and it wasn't. We learned that later, and that happened one time. He told us it was going to be here, and it wasn't. And Mr. Brown wanted to know how come you let him? How come you didn't? You let him tell you a story like that or something? Like just blamed us for the guy that didn't tell us the truth. No, how come we let him do that? Kind of hard to answer.
Was that her trucking company? You
No. No. Have nothing to do on what trucking company we selected. But I don't think they did change trucking companies, but that was threatened. But you know, they're working their heads off trying to keep the business. It was good business, the Olds business, and they tried to do the best they could. But well, it'd be sometimes if they didn't, for some reason or other, they weren't doing their job, we'd go to somebody else because there's always other trucking companies. They're all in competition, and they're all anxious to get the work.
Did the system begin to change more into commercial carriers to cars than you were on the rate?
Well, that was, I think, after the war years. Must have been in the late 40s. After we got going, they trucking companies started expanding, and they started getting a lot of the business close by states.
Which trucking company was that?
Well, we had three of them. We had Howard Somer, C&J, and Industrial Transport. There was three of them. Howard Sober was one of the first ones in the country to get involved in that kind of business. He at first used to drive cars before he had trucks. We would permit the trucking companies to drive cars to the closer points. The far distant points continue to go by rail, but it started out Howard and his wife started that business, both of them driving, and then gradually started expanding, and then the corporation decided that they didn't want the cars driven overland anymore, so that's when they started getting trucks. Yeah, probably in there. So they got more and more trucks. The rail continued to have a lot of business, but it was to the distant points. At that time, they only get 4 cars. The railroad was 4 cars. And then they kept making the truck trailers bigger all the time. It got up to 6 or 8. I think they're up as high as 12 now. Maybe more on the regular trucks. And then the railroads too, they started getting these, what they call tri-level cars. They'd have 3 levels, cars. Well, they drove them, out on our loading dock. We had, different levels. I'd be out there, and it seemed like it was 32. Well, those buildings under the bridge out there. They would, and they still do it that way. They drive them in on the floor, and then they call it a tri-level car. It's a big long car. It used to be all open. They shipped these cars right out in the open, which they don't do anymore because they had a lot of trouble with vandalism. But if you'll notice, all the rail cars are enclosed now on 3 levels, and they got away from they had a lot of vandalism. Oh yeah, I'd get in and steal radios, and especially when it would happen when the rail cars were sitting on a siding, like they would go from here to Detroit. They'd be in a yard there waiting to be put on another train or something. Kids get into them. But they got away from that when they got these closed cars. Mm-hmm. Well, can't remember just how that was now. There's 3 levels. I think the contraption out there where they did the loading, well, it would have had to have 3 levels. And they just drive them in and each get 1 level filled up and go up and drive the others and fill the other level up. But there was 3 levels.
The rate.
Still on.
Oh, got it on. Okay. When that red light is lighted. Yep. How was the traffic or the destination charge figured?
It was figured on the weight of the car
I see.
and the mileage. It was different to all destinations.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, people on the West Coast, many of them would fly in here and fly into Lansing, pick up their car, and they'd save that transportation charge, which on the West Coast was probably $400 or $500. And if they got themselves in here, they saved that money. And that went on quite a bit. At one time there, the airline, I think it was Capital Airlines at that time, had a flight out of Chicago in the morning. So people would fly in on a night flight from California, get into Chicago and leave Chicago about 7 in the morning, and they'd had a special plane just for those people. There were so many of them, they'd fill up a plane. And that worked well for a while till the politicians got into it and decided that the people on the West Coast shouldn't have to pay all that money. That the people in other parts of the country should have to pay part of it. Which means, like, people that live in Lansing now, we pay, it's an equalized charge, the same all over the place. Just used to be $5 or $6 for an employee to buy a car. They drove it out to the lot out there. That's all we'd have to pay. But that all changed. And then they took that plane off because people just didn't come in anymore.
Well, at one time, did we allow people like high school or college students to drive cars to a dealer?
Well, we didn't, but I think probably at the time the trucking sober and those people would maybe hire some of those people. But as I recall, the plant itself never got involved in that. Because we had a contract with the, Sober and C&J and those outfits to take that over.
So you would use those 3 commercial carriers So pretty much the same. A third.
Well, so industrial transport was the smallest, and I'd say probably sober had about 40%, C&J 40, and maybe 20% industrial. They were a smaller company.
That time, so
Yeah, about that time, and then it got so trucking went a little higher, maybe up to 60%. But yeah, it went back and forth according to rates. The rails and the trucks were competing on rates. And if it was cheaper to ship by rail, then it would start going that way. So they were competing all the time. The rails and the trucks were the charges.
So make the decision, shipped its cars.
Yes, right. That was hard up to us. Or give us the best service. And if some company, like if Sober started to fall down and couldn't deliver the cars as fast as we thought they should, and they'd shift them over to the other one, they're all in competition. And the competition between the three trucking companies, as well as between them trucking companies and the railroads. Well, we use the Grand Trunk because our plant is on the Grand Trunk tracks, and it was the New York Central at that time. They got some, but mostly it's Grand Trunk because we're right on their tracks. Well, we've had some where we lost maybe 15 or 20 cars at one time to get a major rail wreck. They take care of a lot of them, but they happen from time to time, and the trucks too. Or once in a while they would have an accident, roll over the truck. But the trucking wasn't so bad, the trucking accidents, because they didn't have as many cars on a vehicle. They railroads, they'd have a lot of cars on if they had a major wreck. It was quite extensive. Trucking companies didn't have unless they got in an accident. Every once in a while they would have trouble going through under a viaduct. They'd slice off top cars if they didn't have enough clearance. They're supposed to know it, but the drivers, they had tried to police that, but every once in a while somebody would make a mistake. Or I remember one time they repaired the road and raised it up. The road was raised up higher than it used to be, and that took care of a few cars. Oh, that trucking company had to pay that. Yeah.
Did you have any problems filing claims with them?
A lot of arguments, about trucking companies would try to get out of as much as they could, just like an insurance company does. But we usually resolved them.
Did you work with Howard Sober personally?
No, his people. Although he was over to our place a lot, especially in his younger days. But I worked with you'd have a claim man, a department set up just to handle claims. I'd work with those people. Sober was Bob Garton, and was at C&J. It was a lady, Helen Earley, industrial. Can't remember his name right now. But those are the people we worked with primarily, unless it got a real sticky deal that we couldn't resolve, and then they had to bring the bigger people in.
Well, you also, anything moved, you moved people too, didn't you?
Yes, we got, I was very much involved in that. From about this time on, I think, or
About
about,
19.
well, late 40s, after the war ended. Wartime, there was very little flying. I remember the first general manager we had that did any flying at all was Mr. Skinner. Before he came here, was Mr. McEwen, and sales, who was a sales manager then, was D.E. Ralston. He would not fly. He evidently had an ear problem, and he did not like to fly. So Mr. Skinner was probably the main one. He started, and there wasn't much service here then. You know, we had that little airport out here, small planes. But it gradually kept coming on stronger. We had a lot of sales department at that time. We're all working with, we're all traveling by rail. You'd go to the West Coast and it would take 2 nights and 3 days.
You'd have to
Go
set
to the West
that up.
Coast. We'd buy their tickets. We worked with the people, the Union Station down on East Michigan there, which is Claire's restaurant now. That was where they had quite a crew in there. And then the Grand Trunk over here. We'd have quite a few people go to Chicago. Always went by Grand Trunk. And that did a lot of travel by rail. But the airlines gradually started to come in and provided more service. And the sales department, especially, they couldn't afford to take a train from a time standpoint. You know, they had to get someplace in a hurry, and can't tie up 2 or 3 days going to the West Coast.
So your secretary would tell you where he had to be at such and such a time, and you worked around that to get him there.
Right, work out a schedule, work up a schedule and show it to him or to. A lot of cases I worked with the secretaries, but in many cases directly with the sales manager or assistants.
Secretary. Is that by Carol then?
I don't know if she went back that far back or not. Mamie, I think probably Mamie was ahead of Vi. That's,
Silver?
yeah, I remember that name now. Forgot about that name.
When Bill, salespeople coming in and out all the time.
Yes. Yes, and we'd bring our, zone managers would come in for a meeting. I would think so, and they usually got themselves in here. I'd get involved if they if their plans changed about going back. The other thing I got involved in a lot was dealer council meetings. Remember those? Well, the dealer would be about 20, I guess, or something like that. And in some cases, their wives. But they would get themselves in, but they would let us. I would get a record of what they were coming in on, what plane they were coming in, and what time. And then I had to get the drivers to meet them at the airport and bring them in to the hotel. That was done by sales. I didn't get involved in that, but that was always quite an undertaking too. Especially when they got ready to go home. They'd have their plans all made to go home, but they'd come in here and something would change or something, and then I'd get involved in trying to change them going back. That was quite an undertaking.
Did most of them fly?
Yes. Yeah, it was all, at that time, it was all flying.
Do you remember any unusual incidents? Dealer council gatherings?
Well, not involved, no. I don't remember anything unusual, except it was quite hectic when they wanted to change their plans. Sometimes they'd have trouble making those changes, but somehow we got it resolved. Yeah, I guess so. Then it was harder, in those days, it was harder to get air reservations than to say it would be now. There wasn't as much service in those days. Service those days.
Travel. Too. We had to issue ban for Oldsmobile, didn't you?
Yes, we, those years, Oldsmobile sponsored the Michigan State Band on a number of trips.
50s, 60s.
Maybe in the 60s,
60s.
I think. Yeah, 60s, I believe. We sponsored them several Rose Bowl trips. I never made one of those. My boss made those Rose Bowl trips. That was Mr. Corwin. Joe Dobbs was representing sales then on those trips. But I did get involved in all the, each year we would take the band to several Big Ten games and Notre Dame. We went to Notre Dame several times. That was usually, went by train once, but most of the time that was a bus deal down there. We had a train trip to Northwestern one year. We also went to Purdue, Indiana, Minneapolis for a Minnesota game. Those were all, that time, train trips. We had our private train, chartered train. Mm-hmm. So we run it, yeah, when we would start it, we'd make up the schedule and how long it would take to get there and what time we wanted to get there. And then we would go from there. Well, the band was, I don't know how many members the band had. Well over 100, I think. Then we'd have some officials from Olds. Mr. Schoen quite often went.
Issue people.
Yes, right, Jerry, well, he never went with us. He must have gone with the team. I don't know how the team went. This was strictly the band. And, those trips were interesting. Well, I remember, I remember mostly the extreme cold weather we ran into a couple times. We went into up to a Minnesota game, and when we pulled into Minneapolis early morning, I think it was 20 below zero. And the band was scheduled to give a concert downtown in front of the courthouse, which they did, but they had enough time. They had little vials of alcohol to put on the valves of the instruments so they wouldn't freeze.
I don't know how they played it.
They didn't very good, but ordinarily that's a wonderful sounding band, but they were pretty handicapped at that time. I think we got beat. I don't remember. Anyway, I didn't. And then down when we ran into extreme cold once in Champaign, Illinois, for an Illinois game. I remember the band left at the halftime. After the halftime, it was just, and that's only time they ever did that. They just could not stand the cold, so they released them after their halftime performance.
How many cars would be in special train?
Well, we'd have probably about 6. It'd be a diner, probably a couple of diners for feeding, and then the rooms for. I think the band was maybe 120 people, and we also went to took the band once to the World's Fair in New York. 19, and that was a chartered, we used a plane for that trip. Mm, Gee, I don't know. Must have been in the late 50s. Um, they gave a concert at the World's Fair parade, and they also gave a concert downtown at Rockefeller Center. And that was a good trip. Kind of an old battered plane that we took, an old Flying Tiger plane, so we could get, but it got us there. Leonard Falcone was the director at that time yet. After he retired, it was Harry Beecham, and I think, well, Harry was still out there. I think that's about the time that the company decided not to sponsor the trips anymore. 60. I think so, yeah. Well, as I recall, it was protesters, for one thing. I remember one of the protests was about playing our theme song, Merry Oldsmobile. They didn't like that. Thought that was, I don't know, undue advantage, I guess. Here we were spending all this money, and it was a lot of money. And I don't remember how much it was, but it had to be a lot of money.
Because you pay for the meals or lodging.
Paid for everything. Everything.
What did who from Frankfurt go besides Joe Dobbs on those trips?
Well, Earl Schoen was he liked to go to those games. I don't remember too many others. Did go,
Jack White.
Jack, I think would, I can't remember him being with us, but I'm sure he was there. And, who was a fellow that preceded Jack White? Do you remember? Anyway, he would go to Edward. Usually go. We also went to when President Johnson was inaugurated, we went to the band was invited to play in the inaugural parade. And that was a train deal. We had a special train, which was parked right out near the stadium there on the campus. And that was our own special train.
Well, Bill must have been a lot of other bands too.
Yes. Oh, that was a big operation. Whoever had charge of planning that parade, I don't know who it was, but that was a job.
So your job was to get there.
Get them there, and right, special train. Yeah, we all the activities at the parade site and everything was, from old standpoint, was handled by Jim Williams. Getting tickets for our people that wanted to see the parade, and other activities. He was quite a busy man.
Now, would that be an overnight trip?
Yes. Yeah, it was overnight. I don't remember what. We must have left here late afternoon. Got in there in the morning, and then we left after the parade ended. Went to be late afternoon and back in here the next morning. So,
Were you ever on the train or in a plane when they had some mechanical problems?
no, fortunately we didn't. This plane this old Flying Tiger plane, I was a little leery about it, but it made it all right. And the train never had any trouble.
Press announcement went to the West Coast and New York. Did you set that up?
Well, I was when the press announcements were made. Those meetings were in conjunction with the announcement show. Like we were in remember we were in San Francisco, a time where we had the show for the dealers in the afternoon, and they put a special show on at night for members of the press and other special guests, friends that we wanted to invite. And that was in the evening, preceded by a big dinner at the Fairmont Hotel. And the other press deals I was involved with mostly down at Detroit or Milford Proving Grounds. You know, each year they'd try to go someplace different. And I'd be involved in getting we have to truck the automobiles down. Those were all show cars that Hendy got ready and traveled. We got our local trucking companies to haul the cars down. And then I would be usually get a bus, hire a bus to take they'd have the preview. They'd have a dinner, I guess, the night before in Detroit someplace, or Ford Auditorium, or one of those places. And then the next day, I remember one time we bussed them out to Milford, or bussed them to a golf club in Rochester, or wherever they had them down there. But that's how I was involved. Just the only transportation there was trying to get the dealers out there if they didn't have transportation, or get them to the airport after it was over with.
Well, anything about moving, but that people mover situation changed as time went on, didn't it? Didn't the Olds have at one time somebody in there working like closer to the airlines?
Yes, that was, in fact, it was after I left in 79. Up to that time, we did it. The travel got real heavy. We had about 7 or 8 trips a day going out of Lansing. And we would make arrangements with the airline. We'd go downtown to the ticket office down in the Hotel Olds building there, and bring the tickets back. And then that computer started to come in, and we had a ticket machine installed in our office, which was hooked up with reservation girls in Detroit. So we would call them, and they would print a ticket on their machine in their office, and it would appear on the machine in our office, a complete ticket and everything. We went that way for a while, and then after, in 1980, a local travel agency, Kinder, put one of his employees right in our office, and she handled it all. It was a labor saving thing. So they eliminated a party that, like the party that replaced me, a couple of people, it freed them up to do other things. And then that went on for a few years. And then the corporation decided to create a central transportation office in Detroit for all the divisions. So, and that's
people.
Yes, and that's sure that's the way it is to this present day. The secretary in Lansing will call this number in Detroit, give them the information what she needed in tickets, and they have a courier that travels from Detroit to Lansing and the Pontiac and the Flint every day delivering tickets. So that kind of eliminated that whole activity from the traffic department.
But just kind of material moving to people moving.
As the years went on, as it got heavier, this man George Scahan was back in those days in 40. He did what passenger work there was, and there wasn't an awful lot of it then. But as the years went on and it got heavier, I got into it, be myself and another Hardy worked on it full time, just about full time. Oh, this was yeah, I think you know her. I can't remember now. Yeah, another girl. And we both worked on claims too. I had an activity on claim work, which took a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And or anything that we bought coming in here, parts to become damaged or become lost or something. On anything that moved, but it was mostly cars. No, but maybe if somebody, uh, well, that's right, lost bag sometimes, but usually the bag showed up sooner or later. And well, outside of arranging, I arranged the trip, purchased the tickets for Jim Stroud, but the after that tragedy, I wasn't involved in that. It was the airlines, I suppose, working with survivors of Jim, but I didn't get involved in that.
I think you've covered your career, Bill. How many people would you move in a year? Toward the end.
You're talking about people traveling? Yeah. Yeah, we used to count. We used to keep a very accurate record of the number of trips. Well, I would say it must have averaged about 7 or 8 a day, each working day. Besides all the big activity groups, where we got involved in at one time we had a sales convention in Lansing a couple times, and I had to make the travel arrangements, buy all the tickets and everything for all the zone people in the country that came in here. And that was, oh yeah, well, I don't know how many's in the, what do we have, 28 zones, 25? And you'd have about, well, probably some bigger than others, but it was I worked very close with Bert Green on that. Right on scheduling and when he wanted them in here and so forth. And we had some special trains. We had a special train out of Chicago where they flew into, that time the service in Lansing wasn't as good as it is now. So I remember we brought a bunch of them into Chicago and ran a special train out of Chicago in here.
That'd be about the 60s.
I know, it's got that, those brochures I had the other day there. What years was it? That in the 60s, was it? I don't remember exactly. But we got, but then that kind of, and then we took them all to Boca Raton. That was 54, that paper I just gave you, that we had to do all of that down to, yeah, that was a sales convention. No, that particular thing was for dealers. That was 400 dealers who would win a contest. Yeah, but our department arranged all that transportation. I didn't go down there. Mr. Corwin went down there, but we were involved in it. Yeah. Then we had a sales convention once in Phoenix, where we took all his own people out to Phoenix. That was a big activity. People specifically, or personality, or I know his son worked in the field. Yeah, he was one of the westerns. He was starting out then, I think, hadn't been in the sales department too long. Oh, it was nothing unusual. Just we got ready to start this special train coming to Lansing, and he was missing. Turned out he went to the wrong railroad station.
Oh, dear.
But I guess he finally came around.
Joke,
Yeah.
Mr. Wetzel's son.
Kind of embarrassing to him. Well, it didn't seem to bother him. Nothing seemed to bother him too much. I can't think of a name.
Display.
Yeah. Right. We were, we worked very close with them. Tom Hendy and myself. When that first started in the 50s, 57 about, and there we would make a preliminary trip around all the zones that were going to have the shows and hire buses and trucks and everything that had to be ready when we pulled into town with our train. And then when we actually started the train for the tour, we'd be out for 6 weeks. And that gradually, as the years went on, that was, of course, too much time to consume for that. So we started flying the people, trucking the all the show and exhibit stuff, and they cut it down to maybe 10 days. And
What do you mean?
started out in New York, went to, I think from New York we went to Dallas, San Francisco. See, it was a slow operation by train. We had all the automobiles on the train. We had all the exhibit. So we had two things. We had the show, the theatrical show, and all those materials and props and lights and curtains and
Carpet.
well, not carpet for the show. The show part was all that show stuff. That took about 3 railroad cars for that, and then all of Tom Hendy's material, carpeting took with us, and different displays that had to be set up. But when we loading that train took 8 or 10 hours. Then well, one year when we were celebrating some anniversary, we had a 19-car train, carried the old Scout and another big, was it 1910 touring car? I think we took that with us. And that took some extra cars. And had a couple carloads of carpeting alone that we would put down in some of these exhibit halls we went into. Our management didn't like the way the floors looked. Took our own carpeting. But then when we got into say, like, we went from New York to Dallas, and we got into Dallas, maybe late afternoon, it would take all night to unload all these things off the train. Had to go in trucks, and the trucks had to go to the theater and unload there, and that would take all night long. Then it would take another full day for the stage people to get the stage ready for the show, and for Tom to get his display set up. So there was a lot of transit time involved.
Well, yes, and then you define it. There's two load the truck.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into monitoring.
Well, physically, some of them were hard to get into. We had a case once, I think it was San Francisco, that they didn't show up, people that we had hired. I don't know, they got mixed up on the date or something, but anyway, we had to scramble then, but it came out of it all right. The thing was on such a time basis, a tight schedule, that you really couldn't have any problems like that to get the thing finished.
Have to hire union people.
Yes. You show people that have their own union, what do they call it? Anyway, Tom Hendy had some trouble in New York a couple of times with labor unions, threatening to not show up or not do the work they were supposed to do, but they always came out of it all right.
Why would they do that?
Well, jurisdictional for one thing, like in the tried at the Cobo Hall, the Teamsters and the another union got to quarreling over who did what, quarreling on who was going to had this job to do and that job to do. But Tom was real good about handling things like that. In New York, we had to handle the police. We parked our trucks on say right on Broadway. We always took over one of the main theaters there, narrow streets, and you weren't supposed to park any truck on the street. There was no other place to go. So the police would come along asking for a handout for some money, so we wouldn't give them a ticket, or so they wouldn't give us a ticket. And so Tom always had to carry a few extra, some of the green stuff in his pocket to pass out to these guys. So he'd leave us alone. But every city was different. Chicago, Tom would go to the police department and make arrangements for a donation to their pension fund or something like that. Then they'd leave us alone. Kansas City, the zone people there would hire off-duty policemen to chauffeur and give them little jobs like that, and then they'd leave us alone.
It's interesting. Where did you play in Chicago?
The first time was at the Opera House. And then after that, it was the McCormick place. What do they call that theater there? They got a big, nice theater in there. And then there was another theater downtown we used, but usually it was, wherever they could get. That was Bob Jarbough's job to line up these facilities at least a year ahead of time.
Like if you were there this year, you'd want to make your
Yeah, he'd get that right. They'd have to have those dates all set and everything.
Something.
No. Fortunately, we didn't. That would have been Jarbough's problem anyway. I didn't get involved in that. But I don't remember that happening. We get a signed contract and have to observe it.
Did you work much with the general managers?
Not directly, unless they had something personal. That didn't happen very often. I know our department arranged a trip that Mr. Wolf took to Europe one time. Bob Hosel in fact, made a trip to New York. They worked with a New York travel agent to do that. I don't know why they went down there. We could have done it here. But
This was a business trip?
No, this was a personal trip. Also, I used to get involved in a lot of personal trips. Bill Buxton or Mark Litterlow, those people asked me to arrange some of their personal trips. And I did it for several people around the office there. Wasn't too crazy about it, but thought I should do it because it took a lot of time. They wanted the cheapest fares and all this and that. Also, our big executives, they always wanted the cheapest fare.
So you really have to do quite a bit of searching around.
Yeah. It's more work. Our business travel, we tried to get usually there's only one business fare available. Get into a personal deal, if you buy it so many days ahead and certain things, you can sometimes get a cheaper fare. So I got into quite a bit of that.
Well, Bill, you were pressured some.
Yes, some things were kind of quite a lot of stress. You'd be.
Get to you?
Well, yeah, I tried to handle it all right. Yeah, something you couldn't, where you're expected to get something, especially when it was hard to get space. like airspace. Like Mr. Cook would call and want to have a personal trip or something, and sometimes the dates he wanted to go were just awfully hard to get. But we usually came through. No, not especially. We used to go down to Florida quite a bit. And we used to have sometimes problems with when rail travel, some of our sailing executives that would, well, Jones, Rocket Jones, some of us would always travel by train. Sometimes the trains would get filled up, or supposedly filled up. Usually somebody on the train would have an extra ticket available that they could, and sometimes, this is when I first started in it, I know I used to sometimes call on my, well, I guess it would be Mr. Corwin. If I had a real tough one where I couldn't get the space, the people said, well, the train is just sold out, isn't available. He would call one of the top people in the railroad, and usually he could get something done. Somebody would, evidently they held some tickets aside for like that, because the railroads weren't, the only thing they had the passenger service for really was kind of a PR thing. It wasn't profitable for those. Passenger business was not profitable, but they used to, and the freight, of course, is the big thing. That's where they made their money. And somebody like us that gave the railroads a lot of freight business, we would have some influence with the top people. So once in a while, I would have to call for help on that, but not very often. It was when I first got into it, anyway. I didn't know the people that he knew. Later on, I got to know the people that could help me.
Do you remember Mr. Jones working with him very often?
I'm getting him, Mr. Ralston, somebody I know I had a tough time getting, Ralston, I think it was, going to the West Coast, that I had to get some special help from Mr. Corwin to get him taken care of.
How many years were you?
43 and a half. Yep.
You spent some happy years here.
A lot of good years, yeah. I just enjoyed it. Well, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of stressful times, but there were a lot of other good things about it. You know, I got around the country a lot. That if I hadn't been in that department or on that job, I would have never got out of Lansing, probably. But
You traveled quite a bit.
yeah, quite a bit. Especially when we got into the announcement shows. That was a lot of travel. You know, we're all the great cities, big cities. Towards the latter years, we were going out to. They started going to Vegas pretty much all the time towards the last. Instead of going around different cities, they'd bring the dealers into Vegas. Mm-hmm.
Well, then when you began using trucks, you didn't have the problem of having to unload at the railroad and bring things.
No, that's right. That was a big time saver, because it eliminated all that extra handling of loading into the trucks, out of the trucks, then back into the trucks again and back to the train. This way when the railroads got so they couldn't provide the service or the cars anymore, we went to using moving vans. We used special haulers for the car vans for the automobiles, and usually moving vans. The moving van company would come up with equipment to haul all the display stuff and the stage stuff, and that saved a lot of time. And then we would fly the people, which was another big time saver. We would get a chartered plane, put the whole cast on the plane, and that worked a lot better too.
A lot of times these people traveled right along, didn't they?
He had some key people. Like I had, well, he had to set up. His job was to set up the displays. He'd have about 3 key people who would supervise local people in each city. Of course, all union people, carpenters. And Jack Shaver usually stayed back home here to take Tom's telephone calls in the middle of the night to run down to the warehouse and find something and ship it. But Bill Lively went with us. Joe DeShriver. Some of those people are gone now, but they would had a sound man. Mr. Wolfram was very fussy about the sound equipment. They carried amplifiers and carried big speakers and put these big speakers up in the theater. That's when theaters didn't have as good a sound equipment as they got now. Probably now they wouldn't have to do that, but we carried a great big speaker that they hung up in the ceiling in the theaters. And Mr. Wolfram had a special podium, and it was exactly right for him, the right height and everything. Carried that with us. But that was Tom's job, and then they hired the show people. They would have a musical director, and he would, for about a week before the show started out in New York, the show was just being built up. This musical director would gather a bunch of New York musicians and make all the arrangements for the music, write it all out. And then when we started on the road, we would take just like a drummer and a trumpet player, a piano player, key people. They'd take those arrangements and take them into Dallas and hire local musicians. And then they would rehearse about it. They'd give them these arrangements, pass out this music to all these local people, and rehearse for about a day, and the thing was all set. You'd think they'd played together forever. When the show started the next day, they had a big orchestra there, but only about 3 people we took with us.
Said people in each city.
Well, it saved traveling all these people. We'd had to travel all those people, and I think they'd probably been in trouble with the union anyway, because the union wants local people to have the work. So I don't think they could have done it otherwise anyway. But it made a lot more. All they had to do was rehearse for a day.
You said break the music out.
The arranger in New York, they would have Deefy brother hired all the show people. Headed up by Frank Egan. He hired all the cast.
Selected.
Yes, usually one year they had Good News, Pajama Game. They took they were able to take certain musical numbers from those shows, and then in addition to the regular numbers the standard numbers that everybody knows, they would write, somebody would write up a commercial song and work it in that way. And it was one big commercial, but it was very good. We had good talent, very good talent. Broadway people who were available during the time that we traveled, which was in August, because there wasn't much activity on Broadway in that time of the year. So that's why they were able to hire good people like that.
Well, Bill, can you think of anything else you'd like to cover in your interview? Any interesting anecdotes or people?
I don't think of anything right now. I'm sure when I get out of here, I'll probably think of them. But Oh, no, a lot of things happen through the years.
Sure.
I just can't think of anything right now.
Do you, what suggestions or accomplishments do you feel you made while you were there at Oldsmobile in your career?
Well, in the work I did, mostly I was involved in these transportation claims. We had a lot of improvements made in the forms that we used. Always trying to get something that was more efficient, save a lot of time on the forms on different things like that. We were able to do, and the passenger end of it really came up when air travel first started, and made a lot of improvements along the way we made reservations, trying to be more efficient all the time.
Some of those things that were probably a result of your experience and suggestions.
Yes, as the years go on, you see better ways to do things. I can't pick out anything in particular right now. We kept getting a little better all the time.
But you were ready to retire.
Yes, as I say, I enjoyed it there, but I didn't fight it. I didn't have any problem adjusting.
Well, Bill,
Got a lot of good memories.
yes, you do. I'm glad you're sharing with us. Do you mind signing another release, another agreement, because we got a different date on this one?
It's 21st.
Yes, yes. I had covered that the other day, and this happens to be Oldsmobile's 93rd birthday, too.
Is it?
Yes.
93, yeah.
So this is a propitious date for your interview. Close this off. I certainly appreciate your bringing in this record, 1955, and also the personnel chart here dated 1940.
Yeah, I was glad I had that.
This is going to be very helpful when you're going through it, too.
I think this may be one of the first, before, as I recall, before Mr. Skinner came, there wasn't nobody ever heard of an organization chart around there. Wasn't any, I don't think there was anything such. Yeah. He came in here from Turnstead, and another thing he did right away was hire a procedure writer. What was his name? You could probably remember the name. That time there wasn't any. He set this guy up down in an office down there, your personnel, and all he did was write the procedure. They never had any procedure manuals or anything. Like that. All different departments and different things. Remember those procedure manual books? That was Mr. Skinner's idea. Also this. And I remember he wasn't here very long. You'd see out in the hallway there on the wall and hang a organization chart in a frame. And as I recall, there was nothing like that before he came. Yeah, that was so this must be about the time that he came, I would think.
Yes, he came in 1940 to 53rd.
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Yeah.
the first one.
That would be, I'm sure, November 1st. It would be.
What department made those organizational charts? Do you remember them? Would that be plant layout or methods engineering?
I don't remember, but probably. Probably something like that. Probably methods. That was another thing, as I recall. They didn't have they brought in a guy by the name of Monahan, Bill Monahan, and another fellow who later became head of Westinghouse Electric. Can't remember his name now. Hey, there was a Burns and a PR, wasn't there? A Burns? Was there a Phil Burns?
Ed Warner.
Yeah. Was it
Well, I think there was a,
guy by the name of Burns?
short time, yes, before Warner.
The thing I remember about him, he and I mentioned that Maynard Murray was out in the, in the gun plant, and remember this Burns being out there, and he'd written up something, and he had to show it to Murray for approval. It must have been about some operation of the gun plant or something. And in there, this Burns using the term doubling in brass. You heard that term, like it's usually for musicians, where a musician will double on a trombone and a cornet.
Yes.
Doubling in brass. That meant that whoever he's talking about could do different things. But Murray could not accept that. I guess he didn't understand the term at all, and probably wasn't involved in music. But he made him take that out because he thought that was. He probably thought it reflected on. Of course, it was this gun thing was all different metals and everything. Doubling in brass, he had to have that out there. That guy's name was Burns. But I don't think he was there very long. I don't know if that was Phil Burns. Anyway. Okay.